Imagine you're standing right at the base of this massive, incredibly steep mountain.
Right.
You got this heavy backpack on, and someone suddenly jams a syringe of just pure adrenaline right into your leg.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. So you take off, you are sprinting up that incline. I mean, you are crushing it, leaping over rocks, dodging branches. You feel absolutely invincible.
Yeah, for about 2 minutes.
Exactly.
Yep.
Maybe 3 minutes later, that adrenaline completely burns out.
Yeah.
Your lungs are just on fire. Your legs feel like they're made of literal lead, and you just collapse in the dirt, gasping for air.
Yep.
And you look up and you realize you haven't even made a dent in the mountain.
It's demoralizing.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that right there is the exact problem with how most of us try to change our lives.
Yeah.
We treat self-improvement like this adrenaline sprint. We rely entirely on these fleeting, super unreliable bursts of what we call motivation.
Yeah, which is a huge mistake.
It's so true. So today, for all of you listening, we are taking a deep dive into the source material of James Clear's Atomic Habits. And our mission here is to just completely dismantle that myth of motivation.
I love it.
We want to figure out how to build good habits and break the bad ones by replacing that exhaustion with, like, the quiet, ruthless mechanics of actual systemized behavior change.
You know, it really is the great trap of modern self-improvement because we're basically biologically and culturally addicted to that dramatic surge of energy.
Well, totally. That New Year's resolution feeling.
Exactly. It feels productive just to experience the emotion of wanting to change. You get a little dopamine hit just from the fantasy of it.
Right. You buy the new running shoes and feel like you've already lost 10 pounds.
Yes. But the text we're analyzing today, it fundamentally challenges that entire paradigm. Society loves the overnight success story, but this source argues that changing your behavior doesn't rely on summoning heroic amounts of willpower. It relies on a completely different, almost mathematical reality. Just the boring, quiet architecture of foolproof systems.
Okay, let's unpack this because I think the adrenaline analogy really captures the exhaustion you feel when you try to overhaul everything at once.
It really does.
Motivation is fantastic for a sprint.
Yeah.
Like if you need to lift a car off someone, use motivation.
Sure, adrenaline is great for emergencies.
Right. But if you want to, say, write a novel or master a new programming language or get in elite physical shape, relying on an emotional spike is metabolically exhausting.
It's completely unsustainable.
So if we are officially abandoning those dramatic bursts of action, what do we replace them with? The text gives us this very specific metric, right? The 1% rule.
Yeah, the 1% rule. This is basically the concept of compounding, but applied to human behavior rather than, finance.
Okay.
The core premise is that marginal improvements, getting just 1% better every day, compound into these staggering results over time.
Just 1%.
Just 1%. But to really grasp why this works, we have to look at the neurology behind it, not just the math. It's about how the brain actually rewires itself.
Okay, wait, explain that connection. How does a 1% behavioral shift translate neurologically? Because, frankly, our brains are terrible at understanding exponential growth.
We really are.
We think linearly. Add 1 to 1, get 2.
Precisely. We expect progress to be a straight line. But compounding means the growth builds on top of the previous growth. So mathematically, if you get 1% better each day for 1 year, you don't just become 365% better.
Right, because of the compounding.
Exactly. Because of that compounding effect, you actually end up 37 times better by the end of the year.
37 times. That's wild.
And conversely, if you decline by 1% every day, you degrade almost down to 0. Neurologically, this maps perfectly to neuroplasticity, specifically Hebb's law.
Hebb's law. Remind me what that is.
It's the principle that neurons that fire together wire together.
Okay. So when we talk about a 1% improvement, we're actually talking about just slightly deepening a physical neural pathway.
Exactly that. Think of a new habit, imagine hacking a path through a dense jungle with a machete.
Okay, I'm in a jungle.
The first time you do it, say, choosing to read 10 pages of a book instead of scrolling on your phone, it requires immense cognitive effort. The path is super overgrown.
You're sweating, you're hacking away at the vines.
Right. But every single time you make that tiny 1% choice, your brain literally coats that specific neural pathway in this fatty substance called myelin.
Myelin.
Yeah, myelin acts like insulation on an electrical wire. It makes the signal travel faster and with less energy.
So the 1% rule is essentially a myelination strategy.
That's a great way to put it.
You aren't trying to clear the whole jungle in one afternoon. You're just trying to walk down the exact same trail one more time, laying down one more microscopic layer of myelin.
Yes. But here is the challenge, and this is why so many people give up. The author calls this the plateau of latent potential.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, because the brain is physically rewiring at a microscopic level, a 1% change is completely invisible in the moment.
Oh, I see.
You study a complex subject for 20 minutes tonight, you still aren't going to master it by tomorrow morning. You do a core workout today, you look identical in the mirror tomorrow.
The change is latent, like it's stored potential, not visible progress.
Exactly. The line of progress feels totally flat for a really long time before it suddenly hits this critical mass and curves sharply upward.
Right.
The author uses this brilliant metaphor. Imagine an ice cube sitting on a table in a room that is 25 degrees.
Okay.
You heat the room to 26 degrees, nothing happens. 27, 28, 29, 30, 31 degrees.
Still frozen.
Still just an ice cube. All that energy, all those 1% temperature increases, they seem completely wasted. But then you hit 32 degrees and the ice begins to melt.
Wow.
The melting wasn't the result of that final 1 degree shift. It was the accumulated potential of all the previous shifts.
I love that. But I have to push back a little on the practical side of this.
Sure, go ahead.
Because measuring a 1% shift in temperature is easy. You look at a thermometer. But how do you isolate a 1% improvement in complex human behavior? Like, how do I know I am exactly 1% better at managing my anxiety or 1% better at leading a team at work?
Right, it's not like there's an anxiety thermometer.
Exactly. It feels a bit too abstract to actually track.
It is abstract if you try to assign a literal, strict percentage to a soft skill. But the 1% rule is really more of a philosophy of granular focus.
Granular focus. Okay.
Yeah, it's about isolating the smallest possible unit of friction and removing it, or the smallest possible unit of progress and executing it. It's reading one single sentence. It's taking one deep breath before you reply to a stressful email.
So you aren't measuring the grand total of your leadership skills.
No, you're just verifying the execution of a microaction. Imagine adjusting the steering wheel of a giant ship by just one single degree.
Right. You wouldn't even notice the ship turning.
You wouldn't notice it immediately? No. But eventually, you end up on a completely different continent.
That makes so much sense. So it relieves you and anyone listening from that crushing pressure of needing to completely overhaul your life by tomorrow.
Exactly.
You know, you don't need to wake up at 4 a.m., meditate for an hour, run 10 miles, and drink a kale smoothie if your current routine is waking up at 8 and eating a donut.
Right. That's a recipe for failure.
Your 1% is just drinking one glass of water before you eat the donut.
That is your 1%, yes. And that latent potential brings us to this massive contradiction in how we usually approach success.
How so?
Well, if progress is invisible for weeks or months while the brain myelinates these new pathways, then staring at your ultimate goal every day is actually a recipe for depression.
Oh, man. Yeah, because if I'm staring at the goal of losing 50 pounds and I've been doing my tiny 1% micro habits for 3 weeks, the scale might not have moved at all.
Not an inch.
So the goal makes me feel like a total failure, even though the system is technically working exactly as it should.
Which is why the source material explicitly warns against goal setting as the primary mechanism for change.
That is a radical departure from conventional wisdom.
It really is. We are constantly told to set big, audacious goals. Dream big. But the text argues unequivocally that success comes from daily systems, not just setting goals.
Okay, let's clearly define the difference here, because I feel like those words get heavily conflated. Like, in the corporate world, in sports, in self-help, people use system and goal as totally interchangeable synonyms.
Oh, constantly. But they are fundamentally distinct. A goal is a target outcome. It's a destination. Hitting $1 million in Q3 revenue, running a sub-4-hour marathon, writing a book.
Right. Those are finish lines.
Exactly. A system, on the other hand, is the continuous process. It's the daily architecture of habits that runs regardless of the outcome.
Regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, so the system is your daily lead generation protocol. It's your Tuesday track workout. It's writing 500 words every single morning at 7 a.m. A goal is a momentary result, but a system is the process that inevitably leads to the result.
That challenges the standard corporate model pretty significantly, doesn't it?
Huge challenge to it.
Because every quarterly review, every KPI, every OKR, it's all inherently goal-based. If goals are just destinations, it seems like the entire corporate review structure is basically measuring the wrong thing. It's measuring the output, not the actual machine generating the output.
It absolutely is. And what's fascinating here is that the text points out a massive logical flaw in our cultural obsession with goals. It's a textbook case of survivorship bias.
Survivorship bias. Walk me through that.
If you look closely at any highly competitive environment, the winners and the losers usually have the exact same goals.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Every single athlete at the starting line of the Olympic sprint has the exact same goal. They all want the gold medal.
Every single one of them, every candidate applying for an executive position has the goal of getting the job.
That's a huge light bulb moment. If successful and unsuccessful people share the exact same goals, then the goal itself cannot possibly be what differentiates them.
Exactly. The goal is merely the entry requirement to even play the game. The true differentiator is the system. The winner is simply the person or the organization that built a more refined, more consistent, higher fidelity daily system.
You know, the analogy that comes to mind isn't a scoreboard, but an engine.
Oh, I like that.
The goal is just the speedometer on the dashboard saying you want to hit 200 miles per hour.
Right.
You can tap the glass on that speedometer all day long. You can visualize the needle moving. You can write 200 mph on a sticky note and put it on your bathroom mirror.
Right, doing all the manifestation tricks.
Exactly. But the car doesn't go faster unless you actually tune the engine, optimize the fuel intake, and upgrade the transmission. The system is the actual engineering. The goal is just a measurement of the engineering.
That's a perfect analogy. And the danger of focusing only on the speedometer is what happens after you hit the target. Think about it. What happens when you achieve a massive goal?
The yo-yo effect. We see this constantly.
Yeah.
Someone trains aggressively for a marathon, they cross the finish line, they get the heavy metal placed around their neck, and then they literally don't run again for 6 months.
Because the goal was the only structural integrity holding their behavior together. Once the goal is achieved, the structure collapses.
Right. The motivation just vanishes because it was entirely outcome dependent.
Exactly. Systems, however, are infinite. They continue indefinitely. When your system is simply, I am a person who runs, crossing a marathon finish line is just a single data point along an endless timeline. It doesn't stop the behavior.
Because there's no finish line for who you are.
Exactly. And goals restrict your happiness, too. The implicit assumption behind any goal is basically, once I reach my goal, then I will be happy.
Which just defers fulfillment to this imaginary future state.
Yes. But a systems-first mentality allows you to be successful every single day that your system is running.
Okay, so if we accept that the daily engineering, the playbook, the system, is what actually matters, why do we have such an incredibly hard time executing it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right, because if I logically know that writing 500 words a day is the system, why do I still sit on the couch and watch TV instead?
It's frustrating.
According to the text, it's because we're often trying to change the wrong layer of our behavior. We're trying to change what we do before changing who we are.
This is perhaps the most profound psychological shift in the entire summary. We are moving from the behavioral outcome to the core identity. The text breaks down change into 3 concentric circles, kind of like an onion.
Okay, layer 1.
The outermost layer is changing your outcomes, losing weight, writing a book. The middle layer is changing your processes, implementing a new routine at the gym. But the innermost layer, the absolute core, is changing your identity, your beliefs, your worldviews, your self-image.
And the central thesis here is that lasting change only happens when it originates from that innermost layer, identity-based habits.
Yes.
So instead of saying, I want to run, you must genuinely believe I am a runner.
To understand why this is so critical, we have to look at the psychology of cognitive dissonance. Humans have a deep neurological need for internal consistency.
You want our actions to match our beliefs.
Exactly. We will do almost anything to avoid acting out of alignment with our established self-image. So if you deeply believe you are a terrible student, but you try to implement a system of studying for 3 hours a day, you are forcing your behavior to conflict with your core identity.
So every study session becomes this monumental battle of willpower. You're basically fighting yourself.
Precisely. You are acting in direct contradiction to your internal truth. And the brain hates this friction. It requires massive cognitive load.
No.
Eventually, when your willpower depletes, and let's be honest, it always depletes, your brain will pull you right back to your established identity.
It'll just whisper, "Why are you studying so hard? You aren't the academic type. Just turn on the video game."
Exactly. But if you shift that core belief to, I am a dedicated learner, then studying is no longer a chore or a punishment. It's simply fulfilling your nature. You study because that is just what learners do. The behavior becomes an expression of your identity rather than an exhausting attempt to achieve an outcome.
Okay, but I have to throw a flag on the play here.
Fair enough. Throw it.
Let's look at a really complex, deeply entrenched scenario. Let's say someone has smoked a pack of cigarettes a day for 20 years,
Okay.
and they want to quit. Are you telling me they just need to walk around saying, "I am not a smoker," and that little linguistic trick is going to magically rewrite 2 decades of chemical dependency and behavioral conditioning?
No, absolutely not.
Because isn't this just a glorified version of fake it till you make it? I mean, the brain isn't stupid. It knows you're a smoker. It knows you're faking it.
It is a vital critique, and if it were just positive affirmations in the mirror, it would absolutely fail. The brain definitely detects the lie. The identity shift cannot be a delusion. It has to be earned.
Earned. How?
The identity does not precede the action in a vacuum. They are locked in a continuous feedback loop. Your habits shape your identity, and your identity shapes your habits.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because how do you break into that loop if your current identity is completely toxic to your goals?
You use the 1% rule as evidence. This is the crucial connection. Those tiny micro actions we discussed earlier, they aren't just about compounding physical results. They serve a much deeper psychological purpose. They serve as the irrefutable proof that validates the new identity.
Proof.
Yes, the author states that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become.
Oh, habits are votes. That's a brilliant framing.
It really is. You want to be a non-smoker. When the craving hits and you manage to delay smoking for just 10 minutes, that 10-minute delay is a vote. It is undeniable empirical evidence. You didn't cure your addiction in 10 minutes, but you cast a tangible vote for the identity of a non-smoker.
Right. You want to be a writer. You don't need to publish a whole novel today. You write one paragraph.
Exactly. That action is a vote. The brain looks at that paragraph and says, well, the evidence suggests we are writing. We must be a writer.
The habit is the evidence that the identity is real.
Yes, no single instance will transform your beliefs overnight. But as the votes build up, the evidence of your new identity becomes mathematically overwhelming. The outcome is just the byproduct. The real goal is to become the type of person who can achieve those things.
Which gives you, the listener, an incredibly powerful tool right now. If you are struggling with a habit, just audit your language. How are you framing it in your own mind?
It makes a huge difference.
Are you framing it through the lens of a restrictive outcome, like I have to stop eating sugar? Or are you framing it as an identity? I am someone who fuels my body with high-quality nutrients.
Think about the donut example again.
Right. When you are offered a donut, the person who says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit sugar," is a person who still fundamentally identifies as a sugar eater. They're relying on willpower to resist.
But the person who says, no thanks, I don't eat donuts, they are operating from a completely different, frictionless identity.
The linguistic shift reflects the actual psychological reality.
Absolutely. But let's get even more granular. Once we have aligned our identity to our desired habits, how do these habits actually execute on a biological level? Why does a habit even happen in the first place?
To systematically build or break habits, we have to understand the source code of human behavior.
Right. And the source material provides the literal blueprint. It's what the text defines as the habit loop.
The habit loop.
Yes. The foundational premise is that every single habit you have, from brushing your teeth to doom scrolling to how you react when your boss criticizes you, it all operates in a continuous 4-stage feedback loop.
Cue, craving, response, and reward.
Understanding this loop is non-negotiable. It is the neurological engine of action. Let's dissect this cascade because it happens in milliseconds, entirely beneath our conscious awareness.
Step 1, the cue. This is the trigger, right?
Yes. The cue is a piece of information that gets the brain's attention and predicts a potential reward. It can be internal or external.
Give me some examples.
Sure. A specific time of day, a physical location, an emotional state, or even just the notification ping on your phone. Evolutionarily, our prehistoric ancestors were constantly scanning the horizon for cues that signaled primary rewards, like the shape of a fruit tree or the sound of a water source.
But today, we're scanning for different things.
Exactly. Today, we scan for cues predicting secondary rewards. The red dot on an app signaling social approval, the smell of a coffee shop signaling alertness. The cue triggers the brain to initiate the loop.
Which leads instantly into step 2, the craving. And this is where I think most people fundamentally misunderstand their own behavior. The text points out that we don't actually crave the habit itself.
That is such a critical distinction. You do not crave the action, you crave the change in state that the action delivers.
Right, you don't crave the physical sensation of inhaling smoke into your lungs. You crave the dopamine hit and the feeling of stress relief.
Exactly. You don't crave the physical act of pressing a button on a remote to turn on the television. You crave the cognitive numbing or the entertainment. The craving is the motivational force. It's the desire to change your internal condition.
Let's look at the neuroscience of that craving for a second, specifically dopamine, because the source material leans pretty heavily into this. I used to think dopamine was just the chemical released when you experience pleasure.
A lot of people think that.
But that's not entirely accurate, is it?
It's a very common misconception. Dopamine is not simply a pleasure chemical. It's a learning and anticipation chemical. The phenomenon is called the dopamine prediction error.
Dopamine prediction error.
Right. When you first experience a new reward, dopamine spikes after the reward. But once the brain learns the connection between the cue and the reward, the dopamine spike actually shifts to occur before the action.
Wait, really? It spikes before.
Yes, it spikes during the craving phase.
So the neurochemical reward happens in anticipation of the event.
Exactly. It's the anticipation that drives the behavior. When you hear your phone buzz, that's the cue. Your dopamine spikes instantly. That's the craving. And that compels you to pick it up. If you pick it up and it's just a spam email from a store, your dopamine crashes.
Because the reward didn't match the anticipation.
Exactly. That's the prediction error. The brain is driven by the desire to fulfill that anticipated spike. Without the craving, there's zero motivation to act.
Which brings us to step 3, the response. This is the actual physical or mental habit you perform.
The response is the execution. And whether or not you actually perform the response depends on this rapid mathematical equation happening in your brain. Does the motivation, the craving, outweigh the friction, the effort required?
So if the phone is in the other room, maybe you don't check it.
Exactly. If the response requires more physical or cognitive energy than you're willing to expend in that moment, the loop breaks. You just won't do it.
And finally, step 4, the reward.
The reward is the terminus of the habit, and it serves 2 evolutionary purposes. First, it satisfies the craving. It delivers that change in state you are seeking. Second, and more importantly for habit formation, it teaches the brain which actions are worth remembering for the future.
So the brain is essentially just a reward detection mechanism.
That's a great way to think of it. If the response delivers a satisfying reward, the brain catalogs the sequence. It says, okay, noted. When you see this cue, experience this craving, and perform this response, you will get this reward. The neural pathway is myelinated. The loop is closed.
Let's map this out with a complex, modern example. Not just making morning coffee, but something more insidious, like anxiety scrolling on social media.
Oh, perfect example. We all do it.
Right. So the cue, you're sitting at your desk, trying to write a really difficult report, and you hit a mental roadblock. You feel a spike of mild anxiety or boredom. That internal emotional state is the cue.
Exactly. The brain detects that discomfort and immediately triggers the craving. You crave relief from the cognitive strain of that hard work. You want a distraction. You want a quick hit of dopamine to soothe the anxiety.
So then, the response. You open a new tab or you pick up your phone and open a social media platform. The friction is incredibly low. It takes half a second, you scroll.
And the reward. You see a funny video, or you get a notification that someone liked your post. You get a micro hit of validation and entertainment. The anxiety is temporarily numbed. The craving is satisfied.
And crucially, your brain learns, next time work gets difficult and you feel anxious, just open this app for immediate relief.
Boom! The habit loop is locked in. And the terrifying part is how fast it happens.
It really is terrifying.
But the empowering part, the real insight from the source material, is that if we can identify these 4 stages, we can hack them. If any single one of these 4 stages fails, the habit collapses.
Okay, and that is the foundation of the 4 laws of behavior change. We take the theoretical neuroscience of the habit loop we just talked about and translate it into a practical, actionable framework. To build a good habit, you must align with the loop. To break a bad habit, you intentionally disrupt the loop.
Let's go through the 4 laws for building good habits first, and we'll cross-reference them directly with the loop.
Okay.
The first law addresses the cue. The rule is, make it obvious.
Make it obvious, because if the cue is hidden, the habit never triggers.
Exactly. Most of our failures are actually just failures of visibility. If you want to take daily vitamins, but the bottle is shoved in the back of a dark pantry behind the cereal boxes, the cue is invisible. You must architect your environment so the visual trigger is unavoidable.
So put the vitamin bottle directly on top of your coffee maker. You literally cannot make coffee without physically moving the vitamins out of the way. The cue becomes hyper obvious.
Yes. And the text also talks about implementation intentions and habit stacking here, right?
Hmm?
Making the cue obvious isn't just about physical objects. It's about making the time and location obvious.
Right, because vague intentions always fail. Saying, I will exercise more, has no cue.
None at all. An implementation intention provides a precise cue. I will exercise for 30 minutes at 6 a.m. in the local gym. And habit stacking takes an existing, deeply wired habit and uses it as the cue for a new habit.
Like, after I pour my morning coffee, which is the existing habit, I will meditate for 2 minutes, the new habit.
Exactly. The old habit becomes the obvious cue for the new one. Now, the second law addresses the craving. The rule is, make it attractive. This is where that dopamine anticipation comes in.
Make it attractive. We need to make the habit mathematically irresistible to the brain.
Yes, and this often involves a strategy called temptation bundling. You pair an action you want to do, which generates high dopamine, with an action you need to do, which generally generates low dopamine.
Okay, so let's say you want to watch a really trashy reality TV show, but you need to do a grueling session on the stationary bike.
You bundle them. You make a strict rule that you are only allowed to watch that specific show while you are physically pedaling on the bike.
So you're leveraging the high dopamine anticipation of the television show to drag you through the high friction of the workout.
Right. You are making the difficult response artificially attractive by linking it to a guaranteed, highly desirable reward.
Okay, the third law addresses the response.
Yeah.
The rule is make it easy.
Make it easy. This taps into a fundamental principle of behavioral economics, the law of least effort. Energy is precious. Human behavior naturally gravitates toward the path of least resistance.
We are lazy by design.
Biologically lazy, yes. If a habit requires too much friction, too many steps, too much cognitive load, you simply won't do it. But making it easy doesn't mean doing easy things. It means removing the friction that stands between you and doing the hard thing.
You have to prime the environment. If you want to run at 5 a.m., but your clothes are still in the laundry basket, your shoes are out in the garage, and it's dark and cold, the friction is massive.
Oh, your brain calculates the energy required for all that and just says, nope, stay in bed.
Exactly. Making it easy means laying out your clothes right at the foot of the bed, putting your shoes right by the door, and pre-programming the coffee maker the night before. You reduce the number of steps to initiate the behavior down to 0.
And finally, the fourth law addresses the reward. The rule is, make it satisfying.
Make it satisfying. But this is tricky because good habits usually have delayed rewards, right?
Very delayed.
The reward for going to the gym today is that you might live longer in 30 years. The brain doesn't care about 30 years from now.
Yeah.
It wants dopamine right now.
This is what we call the problem of evolutionary mismatch. We evolved in an immediate return environment. If you found a berry in the woods, you ate it and you got immediate calories.
Immediate reward.
Right. But modern society is a delayed return environment. We work for a paycheck we get in 2 weeks. We save for a retirement we get in 40 years. To make a good habit stick, we have to invent an artificial, immediate reward to satisfy the brain's primitive wiring.
So how do we manufacture immediate satisfaction for something like, say, saving money? Because the act of not buying a coffee feels like a deprivation. It doesn't feel like a reward at all.
You have to make the invisible progress visible. If you skip the $5 coffee, you immediately pull out your phone and transfer $5 into a savings account specifically labeled Trip to Europe. Watching the number in that account physically tick upward provides a visceral, immediate hit of satisfaction, or you use a habit tracker. The physical act of crossing a bold red X on a calendar provides a micro hit of dopamine. It satisfies the brain's need for closure and accomplishment in the present moment, which bridges the gap until the delayed reward actually arrives.
I just, I marvel at the symmetry of this framework. It's incredibly elegant. It really demystifies our
It
failures.
takes the shame out of it.
It really does. Because so often people internalize their inability to change. They think, I have no willpower, I'm fundamentally flawed as a person. But this framework reveals that you aren't broken. Your system is just poorly engineered. You tried to execute a habit that was hidden, unattractive, full of friction, and completely unsatisfying. Of course, your brain rejected it.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the true genius of the four laws is revealed when we apply them in reverse.
Yeah.
If you want to break a bad habit, you systematically dismantle the loop by inverting the laws.
Inverting the laws.
Yeah.
Okay, so make the cue invisible. Make the craving unattractive. Make the response difficult. Make the reward unsatisfying.
Exactly. We can play this out with almost any negative behavior. Let's take the habit of constantly checking work emails in the evening, which destroys family time and prevents cognitive recovery.
Okay, let's architect the inversion for that. Step 1, invert the cue. Make it invisible. If your phone is in your pocket and the work laptop is sitting open on the kitchen counter, the visual cues are constantly triggering you.
They're screaming at you to check them.
Right, so you have to remove the cues. When you get home, the laptop goes into a drawer in another room. Notifications for the email app are completely disabled on your phone. You have successfully scrubbed the environment of the trigger.
Perfect. Step 2, invert the craving. Make it unattractive. You have to actively reframe your mindset. You cognitively highlight the negative consequences. You remind yourself, out loud if you have to, that checking email right now makes you an absent parent or a stressed partner. You actively focus on the anxiety it induces, associating the action with pain rather than productivity.
Oh, that's good. Step 3, invert the response. Make it difficult. This is all about introducing massive friction.
Yes, add friction.
You would delete the email app from your phone entirely.
Yeah.
If you want to check email, you have to go to the drawer, boot up the laptop, connect to the VPN, and log in through a web browser with some insanely complex password.
Yeah.
You have inserted 5 high-friction steps between the impulse and the action.
And finally, step 4, invert the reward. Make it unsatisfying. You create an immediate consequence. You make a contract with your spouse. If they catch you checking work emails after 7 p.m., you have to do the worst household chore, say, cleaning the gutters or scrubbing all the bathrooms that very weekend. The immediate anticipation of that punishment makes the behavior deeply, deeply unsatisfying.
You are basically setting up a gauntlet of pain and friction for your bad habits while paving a smooth, downhill, frictionless road for your good ones.
That's exactly what it is.
But when we talk about making cues invisible or responses difficult, we are fundamentally talking about physics. We are talking about the physical space we occupy. Which brings us to a massively underappreciated driver of human behavior: environmental architecture.
Yes. We chronically overestimate the importance of our internal willpower, and we vastly underestimate the influence of our external environment. The text argues that environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior.
Let's dig into that because it directly challenges that whole, pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality.
The concept is known as choice architecture. We really like to believe we are rational agents in complete control of our choices. But a vast percentage of our daily behavior is simply an automatic reaction to the design of the spaces we inhabit. If you walk into a kitchen and there's a plate of fresh, warm cookies sitting right on the island, you are highly likely to eat a cookie.
I know I am.
Exactly. It has absolutely nothing to do with whether you are biologically hungry or whether you have a stated goal to lose weight. It is a behavioral response to a highly salient environmental cue.
So the willpower trap is trying to resist the environment using pure cognitive force. If you want to eat healthier, but you keep a jar of candy right on your desk, you're forcing your brain to make the decision not to eat the candy hundreds of times a day.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
Every single time you look at it, your brain triggers the habit loop. Cue, see candy, craving, want sugar. You have to use willpower to suppress the response. Over an 8-hour workday, that cognitive suppression is literally exhausting.
Yeah.
Eventually, you cave.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You are fighting a war against your own environment, and the environment never gets tired. The cookies don't get tired. People who appear to have extraordinarily high motivation or superhuman self-control, they usually just have environments that are masterfully designed.
They don't even need willpower.
No, because their environment is doing the heavy lifting for them. They have removed the candy jar entirely. They have made the bad habit invisible and difficult by default.
But let me push back with a real-world scenario here. Designing your environment sounds fantastic if you live alone in some pristine, minimalist apartment where you control every single variable.
Sure, yeah.
But what if your environment is inherently chaotic? What if you share a tiny apartment with 3 roommates who leave junk food everywhere? What if you have 3 toddlers and your house is just a war zone of toys and noise? How does the invisible hand work when the environment is actively hostile to your new identity?
It is a profound challenge, and it's reality for most people. When you cannot control the macro environment, the text suggests you must architect microenvironment.
Microenvironments.
This relies on the psychological principle of context-dependent behavior. The brain strongly associates specific locations with specific behaviors. If your entire apartment is chaotic, you cannot change the whole space, but you can designate one specific chair in the corner of your bedroom as the reading chair.
Okay.
You never look at your phone in that chair, you never eat in that chair, you never watch TV there, you only read.
You are creating a hyper-specific, localized cue.
Exactly. By tightly coupling a specific microenvironment to a single habit, the brain eventually learns the context. The moment you sit in that chair, the context triggers the identity of a reader, and the friction drops, regardless of the chaos happening in the rest of the house. The rule is one space, one use. Mixing contexts like trying to work in bed or eating on the couch where you also try to read, it just confuses the brain's associative cues.
That makes a lot of sense. You build a fortress of context. But let's be fiercely realistic for a moment. Even if you architect your microenvironments perfectly, even if you have shifted your identity from wanting an outcome to being the person, and even if you understand the dopamine loops perfectly, life is going to hit you.
It always does.
You will get the flu. Your project at work will catch fire. You will have a day where everything just falls apart and you completely fail to execute your perfectly designed systems. Does a single failure shatter the entire compounding algorithm?
This raises an important question about resilience, and it's perhaps the most critical and compassionate part of the entire framework. It is the antidote to perfectionism. The mathematical reality is that showing up consistently, even when the execution is terrible, matters infinitely more than being perfect.
Let's explore the math of that resilience.
Yeah.
Why is consistency more powerful than intensity? Because our culture absolutely glorifies intensity. We glorify the person who stays up for 3 days straight to finish a project, or the person who works out for 3 hours until they collapse.
We glorify it because it looks dramatic. It makes for a great montage in a movie. But biologically and mathematically, intensity is a terrible strategy for long-term growth. It requires massive recovery, which breaks the habit loop. Let's compare 2 approaches. Intensity is going to the gym on January 1st, lifting weights for 2 hours, tearing your muscles apart, and feeling so exhausted and sore that you literally don't return for 3 weeks.
Right. The neural pathway is not reinforced at all. The identity is not built.
It's a high-friction, low-continuity event. Continuity, the 1% approach, is doing 15 minutes of moderate exercise every single day, no matter what. It is a low-friction, high-continuity approach. The law of large numbers and the mechanics of compounding dictate that a flawed, poorly executed habit done consistently is mathematically far more valuable than a perfect habit done sporadically.
Because the sporadic habit never builds momentum.
Never. It never lays down enough myelin to actually rewire the brain.
This really challenges how we measure our own success. When I have a bad day, say I plan to write a chapter of a book, but I only manage to write 3 terrible sentences, my instinct is to view that as a complete failure. It feels like a 0 for the day. But the system views it differently.
The system views it as a crucial victory because you maintain the architecture. The author has a mantra for this: never miss twice.
Unpack that. Why is the second miss the dangerous one?
Missing a habit once is an anomaly. It's an accident. Life happens. But missing a habit twice in a row is the beginning of a new behavioral pattern. It is the start of a new negative habit loop. The first mistake never ruins you. It is the spiral of repeated mistakes that follows. When you write those 3 terrible sentences, you aren't trying to write a masterpiece in that moment. You are simply trying to cast a vote to protect your identity as a writer. You are protecting the system from decaying.
So what does this all mean? Practically speaking, it means giving yourself the grace to be aggressively mediocre on your bad days.
Aggressively mediocre. I love that.
Right. If you are sick, you don't do your heavy lifting routine, but maybe you just stretch for 2 minutes on the bedroom floor. If you have absolutely no time to cook a healthy dinner, you don't declare the diet ruined and order a massive pizza. You eat an apple and a piece of cheese.
Exactly.
The act of simply showing up, even in a drastically reduced capacity, maintains the system. It keeps the chain unbroken. The runner still goes outside when it's freezing rain, even if they only jog to the end of the block and come right back. They didn't improve their cardiovascular fitness that day, but they ruthlessly protected their identity.
Precisely. They reaffirmed the core belief. I am the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. That psychological continuity is the foundation of the entire compounding process.
Wow. Let's take a breath and synthesize this massive architecture we've explored
They
today.
covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We started by discarding the exhausting, adrenaline-fueled myth of motivation. We replaced it with the ruthless, biological math of compounding 1% changes, understanding that neuroplasticity requires time to cross that plateau of latent potential.
And we learned to abandon the cultural obsession with outcome-driven goals, recognizing their survivorship bias, in favor of designing robust daily systems. We moved the battleground of change from what we want to achieve all the way down to the deepest layer of who we believe we are, building identity through the accumulated evidence of our micro-habits.
Habits are votes. And then we took a scalpel to the neurological engine of human behavior, right? Dissecting the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward. We realized that dopamine drives the anticipation, not just the pleasure, and we learned to hack that loop using the 4 laws, making our desired behaviors obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying.
While simultaneously engineering high-friction gauntlets to make our bad habits invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying, we explored the invisible hand of choice architecture, learning how to manipulate our physical environments and establish micro-contexts to reduce our reliance on willpower.
And finally, we dismantled the trap of perfectionism. We mathematically proved that showing up consistently, even on our absolute worst days, is the true mechanism of long-term transformation. Never miss twice.
It's a profoundly different way of navigating life. It strips away the anxiety of staring at that massive mountain we talked about at the beginning and replaces it with the calm, methodical execution of simply placing one foot in front of the other.
It really does. But before we close this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to analyze on your own, something that builds on the deep neurology we've discussed today.
Right. We spent a significant amount of time detailing how consciously changing your actions will eventually generate the evidence to change your identity. I run, therefore I become a runner. The loop feeds itself.
But because it is a loop, that algorithmic flow of energy goes both ways, completely automatically. So consider this. If your intentional microactions build an intentional identity, what tiny, deeply unconscious habits are you performing every single day right now? The mindless scrolling the exact second you wake up, the complaining about the weather, the defensive posture you take when receiving feedback.
That's a sobering thought.
What accidental, unintended identity are those invisible 1% habits silently building for you, myelination by myelination, without you even realizing it? You might not be actively deciding who you want to become, but your neurobiology is building that person anyway, vote by vote.
Exactly.
The question you have to ask yourself today is, are you going to step in and design the system, or are you just going to let the algorithm decide who you become?